Thank you. I want to thank each of you for being here. I look forward to hearing your testimony. I'm also very grateful to Senator Schmidt, Ranking Member Welch, and those who put together this hearing, working with them. Violence for the purpose of achieving political ends in the United States of America is itself un-American. It's something that is anathema to who we are as a people, and it must be universally condemned and should be regarded as an unthinkable relic of societies that manifestly lack the rule of law, because it is. Our republic has regrettably become infected by a type of ideological cancer, one that tends to excuse even the most heinous acts so long as they can be said to achieve or somehow advance politically favored causes. Now, because of the way our news media tends to lean and a number of factors, those are often leftist causes that are embracing this. If they weren't, if it happened the other way, the media would serve as a check on that. The media doesn't always serve as a check on that when it comes from the left, because very often a number of voices within the media tend to agree with those odds. And I think that's part of how we get to the point where such a high percentage of those who identify themselves as part of the left are willing to say that murder of President Trump is morally justifiable. And other polls have come out since Charlie Kirk's assassination that show that trend getting worse, not better, just in the last few weeks. For examples of this alarming trend, one need look no further than the mostly peaceful burning of various American cities throughout the so-called Summer of Love in 2020, or the coddling of pro-Hamas and anti-Semitic mobs by university administrators just in the last year or two. And even the disgusting attempts to rationalize, excuse, and in many cases even praise the cold-blooded assassination of Charlie Kirk through grotesque distortions of his past public statements and otherwise. This must end. Today, this hearing gives us a real chance to reflect upon and confront this very disturbing and building trend within our society. It's not enough to state that political violence is wrong. We must expose it, call it out where it exists, and root out the forces that tend to enable it. Now, to those who would cite the First Amendment somehow in defense of actions that cannot be defended on their own merits, let us be very clear. Violence is not protected speech. Neither is incitement to violence or funding of violence or facilitation of violence, any more so than a conspiracy to commit violent acts would be protected by the First Amendment. These things are not. They are analytically distinct, legally, constitutionally distinct from speech. They're not covered by the First Amendment. Indeed, the preservation of free speech itself depends on our ability to shield peaceful discourse from those who would silence dissent through any form of violence. Look, modern American society is the greatest civilization the world has ever known. Many on the other side of the aisle have decided that they ought to repeatedly engage in inflammatory, sometimes irresponsible rhetoric that creates permission, sort of establishes a permission structure, you might say, for violence directed at our civil institutions. As the Trump administration works tirelessly to safeguard Americans from this wave of criminal, illegal aliens that have come through over the last 4.5 years, many Democrat leaders have fought back tooth and nail, describing federal law enforcement as, quote, a quote, modern-day Gestapo, as slave patrols, as thugs, and as a collective terror force. Despite multiple assassination attempts against Trump, it was and remains today fashionable in leftist circles to compare President Trump to Hitler and smear his supporters as fascists. What has been the result of this? Well, across the country, ICE agents have been under attack, personally, not just as a group. At an ICE facility in Texas, officers were attacked, with one even being shot in the neck. Investigators later found evidence of left-wing anarchist and anti-government ideology, anti-ICE slogans, Antifa imagery, and online discussions specifically targeting federal agencies. And yet again, much of the left either ignored the story altogether or blamed the government for provoking the attack, and leftists in the media, meanwhile, did at best nothing to stop it, and in other cases, tended to foment it. This violence toward the executive branch is not itself isolated. In 2022, a California man boarded a plane to Maryland with a pistol, with ammunition, and with a fairly distinct plan. His goal? To assassinate Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh because he disagreed with the leaked ruling in the Dobbs case that would go on to overturn Roe v. Wade. He disagreed with that ruling, therefore he decided he had to kill this justice. He was consumed by far-left ideology and the belief that violence is justified somehow when our system does not result in the outcomes desired by the left. He later told investigators that he wanted to, quote-unquote, give his life by killing Brett Kavanaugh himself. That is not activism. That is radicalism. That is extremism. It is driven by the same ideology that calls violent protest resistance and dressing it up in as many euphemisms as people can find. Shockingly, some leftists suggest, almost as a matter of routine, that daring to question their misguided beliefs is akin to perpetuating violence against certain favored groups or disfavored groups. I hope we can find bipartisan consensus in condemning all political violence without reservation and without regard to the ideology of the person at whom the violence might be directed. To overcome the very worst instincts of human nature's somewhat natural tendency toward violence, although it's a tendency that can and must be suppressed in any free civilization, we must first remember that we are one nation and one people under God, united by bonds far stronger than any passing political moment or cause. Political violence, regardless of the alleged justification, regardless of the political beliefs of those embracing it or opposing it, will never and must never be tolerated by this body or by the United States of America. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Lee.